You ever notice that one person who just disappears? Like they're at the party, they're laughing, they're part of the group, and then suddenly they're gone. No dramatic exit, no goodbye. They just evaporate into thin air. And when you text them later, they're home, completely content, watching a documentary about deep-sea creatures, or reorganizing their bookshelf at 11 p.m. And here's the weird part. They're not sad. They're not sitting there feeling sorry for themselves. They're genuinely happy, alone, unbothered, thriving even. Most people see this and think, oh, they must be lonely. But that's where everyone gets it wrong, because there's a massive difference between being alone and being lonely. One is a choice, the other is a wound. And the people who prefer solitude, they're not running away from connection. They're running towards something else entirely, something most people don't understand. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the hidden psychology behind people who choose solitude, who crave their own company, who find peace in the quiet spaces that make everyone else uncomfortable. First, there's the person who recharges in silence. You know this type. They show up to social events, they engage, they participate, but there's an invisible timer ticking in their head, and when it goes off, done, finished. Social battery at 0. They'll literally leave mid-conversation if they have to, not because they don't like you, not because the event is boring, but because their energy is spent, drained, and the only way to refill it is to be alone. This is classic introversion, but it's deeper than just shy or antisocial. Psychologically, their brains process stimulation differently. Social interaction, noise, crowds, it all registers as input that needs to be processed. And unlike extroverts who get energized by external stimulation, introverts get overwhelmed by it. Their nervous system gets flooded. So solitude isn't just a preference, it's a biological need. It's how they reset, how they come back to themselves. And here's what people don't get. When they're alone, they're not doing nothing. They're thinking, reflecting, processing the day, creating, reading, existing without performance. They're not lonely because they don't need constant company to feel whole. They already feel whole. The silence isn't empty. It's full of them. Maybe that's you. Maybe you've sat in your room on a Friday night, completely content, while your phone buzzes with invitations you have no intention of accepting, and you don't feel guilty. You feel relieved. Then there's the person who protects their inner world like it's a sacred space. You could know them for years and still only see the surface, not because they're secretive or cold, but because they're selective, deeply selective. They don't let just anyone in. Their solitude is a fortress, and only a chosen few get the key. Psychologically, these are people with rich internal lives. They spend hours in their own minds, building worlds, ideas, philosophies. They daydream not as an escape, but as a primary mode of existence. And when you live that deeply inside yourself, the outer world can feel intrusive. Small talk feels exhausting. Surface-level relationships feel pointless. They're not being snobs. They're just protecting something precious, their inner landscape, their creativity, their peace. Carl Jung called this the inner self, the part of us that exists independent of external validation. And for these people, that inner self is so developed, so vivid, that it becomes their main source of fulfillment. They're not lonely because they have themselves, and themselves is enough. You might recognize this if you've ever felt more connected to the characters in a book than the people at a party, or if you've spent an entire weekend alone and felt more alive than you did all week. That's not isolation. That's intimacy with yourself. But here's where it gets interesting. There's another type, the person who's been burned by connection and now chooses solitude as protection, not because they don't crave closeness, but because they've learned that closeness comes with cost, disappointment, betrayal, misunderstanding. So they retreat, not into loneliness, but into controlled solitude. This is psychological self-preservation. Attachment theory tells us that people who've experienced inconsistent or painful relationships often develop what's called avoidant attachment. They learn to meet their own needs because depending on others feels dangerous. So they create a life where they don't need anyone. And over time, that life becomes comfortable, safe, preferable even. But here's the twist. They're not lonely because they've replaced external connection with internal stability. They've built a relationship with themselves that's so strong, it compensates for the absence of others. They've become their own best friend, their own support system, their own source of comfort. And honestly, there's something powerful about that. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you've chosen your own company over the risk of being let down again. And maybe that's not sad. Maybe that's wisdom. Then there's the person who's just wired differently. The deep thinker, the philosopher, the one who finds more meaning in a sunset than in a conversation about the weather. They prefer being alone because solitude gives them space to think without interruption, without noise, without the constant demand to be someone other than who they are. Psychologically, these are often people with high introspective intelligence. They're observers, analyzers. They see patterns others miss. They ask questions others don't think to ask. And that level of depth doesn't thrive in superficial environments. It thrives in quiet, in stillness, in the kind of solitude where thoughts can unfold without distraction. They're not lonely because their mind is always occupied, always exploring, always discovering. They have an entire universe inside their head, and it's more interesting than most social gatherings. That's not arrogance. That's just reality for them. Maybe you've felt this. Maybe you've sat alone in a coffee shop, watching people, lost in thought, and felt more connected to life than you ever did trying to fit into a group. That's not loneliness, that's presence. And finally, there's the person who's simply content. No trauma, no avoidance, no deep psychological explanation. They just genuinely prefer their own company. They've tried the constant socializing, the always being available thing, and they realized it's not for them. They don't need it, they don't want it, and they're not apologizing for it. This is self-actualization. It's when you know yourself well enough to design a life that fits you, not one that fits society's expectations. These people have done the work. They've figured out what makes them happy, and they've chosen it. Unapologetically, they're not lonely because they're living authentically, and authenticity is the antidote to loneliness. So here's the thing. If you're someone who prefers being alone, you don't owe anyone an explanation. You're not broken. You're not antisocial. You're not missing out. You're just wired differently. And in a world that glorifies constant connection, constant noise, constant performance, choosing solitude is an act of rebellion. It's an act of self-respect. So which one are you? The recharger? The protector? The wounded healer? The deep thinker? The authentically content? Maybe you're a mix. Maybe you see yourself in all of them. Drop a comment. Let me know. Because I guarantee you're not alone in preferring to be alone. And if that's not the most beautifully ironic thing about all of this, I don't know what is.